My son had the security guard grab my arm in front of 200 people, and he did not even have the decency to look me in the eye when it happened. I want you to understand what that means. Not the embarrassment of it, though that was real enough. I mean the mechanics of it. The deliberate, premeditated mechanics. You do not have a security guard stationed near the back exit of your own company anniversary party unless you planned for someone to be removed. And the only person my son wanted removed that night was me. I am Raymond. People call me Ray. I am 64 years old, and for 31 of those years, I built an electrical contracting business out of nothing but a used work van, a rack of tools I bought on credit, and a willingness to climb into crawl spaces that younger men refused to enter. We wired hospitals in Nashville. We wired the new transit hub downtown. We wired the arena where the hockey team plays, every light fixture, every circuit panel, every emergency backup system in that building runs on work that my hands designed. I built Mercer Electrical from a one-man operation into a company with 83 employees and contracts across 4 states. 5 years ago, I handed it to my son. I did not sell it. I did not retire and walk away with a check. I transferred ownership through a structured trust that my attorney drafted to protect the legacy of the company. My son Marcus was 37. He had worked beside me for 12 years. He knew the business. He was smart and driven, and I was proud of him in the way that fathers are proud when they see themselves reflected in someone younger and better looking. I thought I had done everything right. I thought I had built something that would outlast me. The party was a black tie event at the Mercer building downtown, which is what Marcus had renamed our office complex 2 years ago without telling me first. The invitation said Mercer Electrical 25th anniversary celebration. It was technically our 30th, but Marcus had started counting from the year he took over. I noticed that when the invitation arrived, I filed it in the same drawer where I filed all the other small erosions. I arrived in my good suit, the one I bought for my wife Dorothy's funeral 4 years ago. I know how that sounds. I know I should have bought a new one, but Dorothy picked out that fabric herself, a dark charcoal with a faint blue thread running through it, and wearing it still felt like carrying a piece of her with me into rooms she would never see. I arrived on time because I am always on time. My son was already working the room. He was good at it. I will give him that. He had his mother's smile and my handshake, and he moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who had never doubted his right to be in any room. His wife Diane was beside him in a green dress that cost more than I used to pay my first apprentice in a month. She had her hand on his elbow, steering him the way a rudder steers a boat, subtle and constant. I had noticed this about Diane for years. She always had a hand on him. She was always steering. I made my way to them. Marcus shook my hand, which told me something right there, because when you are at a party with your father and you shake his hand instead of hugging him, something has already been decided. Diane kissed the air next to my cheek and looked at my suit with eyes that assessed and dismissed in the same fraction of a second. "Ray," she said, using my first name the way she always did, as if we were colleagues at a firm and not family. "You wore that suit again." "It was a good suit," I said. She turned away before I finished the sentence. The first hour was manageable. I talked to old clients, men and women who had worked with me for decades, who squeezed my hand and told me the company was still the best in the region. I talked to a few of the older crew foremen who had been with us since the early days. Jimmy Tarrant, who had been my first full-time hire 28 years ago, found me by the bar and told me quietly that things had changed around the office. I asked him what he meant. He looked over his shoulder, then looked at his drink. "I'll let you see for yourself," he said. I filed that in the same drawer. Then my son got on the stage. He was a good speaker, another thing I gave him credit for. He thanked the clients. He thanked the staff. He talked about the future of the company, new contracts, new territories, expansion into commercial solar. The crowd applauded. He was electric up there, and I let myself feel the old pride. Then he talked about the past. He told the story of the company the way a man tells a story about a house he bought, not a house someone else built for him. He talked about the early contracts, our early contracts, using the word I where I expected him to say we. He talked about climbing out of a small operation into something significant. He talked about vision and risk and grit. He never said my name. Not once. I stood in the crowd, and I listened to my life being told back to me with myself edited out of it, and I told myself it was just a speech. I told myself he was nervous. I told myself there were things I did not understand about how young men present themselves to the business world. Then he said the part that ended everything. He said, "I want to acknowledge my father, who is here tonight." My father was a tradesman, a good one. He laid the groundwork, in the most literal sense, and we are grateful for that foundation. But what you see here tonight, this team, this growth, this vision for the next decade, that is not the work of the past. That is what happens when you take what the old guard built and you make it into something that can actually compete in the modern world. The old guard. I heard a few people near me shift uncomfortably. Jimmy Tarrant, who was standing 2 people to my left, went very still. I felt the heat rise in my face. I kept it there. I did not move. I did not speak. I should have stayed quiet. That would have been the wise thing. But I am 64 years old, and I spent 30 years in buildings where no one got to dismiss the electrical systems without the lights going out, and I had a thought in my head that I could not contain. I raised my hand. I said, "Marcus." He looked at me from the stage. And in that look, I saw that he had expected this. He had prepared for this. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes went tight and deliberate. "Dad," he said into the microphone, his voice light and managed. "Now is not really the time for Q&A. Laughter from the crowd. Light, polite. The kind that sides with power because power is in the room and power is on the stage. I was not going to ask a question, I said. I just wanted to add something about the company history that I think the clients here would appreciate hearing." The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when people sense a family wound opening in a public place. Marcus smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. He looked at someone near the back of the room. I turned my head and saw the security guard moving before I fully understood why. The guard was young and wide, in a black jacket. He reached me in 8 steps. He put his hand on my elbow, firmly, with the practiced pressure of someone who had been told exactly how to do this without making a scene. "Sir," he said quietly, "if you could come with me." I looked at my son on the stage. He had already turned back to the crowd. He was already speaking again, something about the next quarter, and the room had already followed his eyes back to the stage, leaving me standing there with a stranger's hand on my arm like I was a confused guest who had wandered in from the street. I did not fight it. I am not a man who makes scenes. I walked with the guard to the side exit. The door opened onto a service corridor, gray concrete and fluorescent lighting, the kind of hallway that exists in every building I have ever wired. The hidden architecture that keeps the front of the house beautiful. The guard stopped at the door. "Mr. Mercer asked that guests who are not on the program wait in the lobby," the guard said, with the professional flatness of a man reading from a script he had been given. "I am not a guest," I said. "I am his father." The guard did not have an answer for that. He looked at his shoes. I walked down the corridor. I found a stairwell. I walked down 4 flights to the parking garage, and I sat in my truck for 11 minutes before I started the engine. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. I sat there and I felt something that was not sadness and was not anger exactly. It was the feeling of a circuit breaker tripping, the feeling of a system shutting down to protect itself from a current it was not designed to carry. I drove home, not to my house, because I do not have a house anymore. I sold it 3 years ago, because Marcus and Diane had suggested I move into the guest cottage on their property. "It would be better for everyone," Diane had said. "You would not be alone." And I was lonely, without Dorothy, in a house built for 2 people. So I sold it and moved into their cottage and told myself this was what families did. That proximity was love made practical. The lights in the cottage were on when I pulled up. That was wrong. I always turned the lights off when I left. I had spent 30 years telling apprentices that you never leave a circuit live when you leave a job site. The key did not work. I turned it twice, the way you do when you are certain the key is right but you check anyway. The deadbolt did not move. I crouched and looked at the hardware in the light from my phone. New lock. Installed recently, the scratch marks around the plate were fresh, the brass still bright where the screwdriver had slipped. They had rekeyed it while I was at the party. I went to the window on the side of the cottage. the one with the loose latch I had meant to fix since last spring. I used my pocket knife to ease it open. I climbed inside. I am 64 and my left knee argues with me every morning. But I have been climbing through tight spaces my whole life, and this was not the worst of them. I stood in the dark of my own cottage, in the house on the property that my son lived on because of a trust I had created. And I understood something that I had been refusing to understand for a long time. The phone call came an hour later. I was sitting on the floor of the cottage with my back against the bed, in the dark, because I had tried the lights and found that the circuit breaker for the cottage had been shut off at the main panel. No power. In October in Tennessee, with the temperature already dropping into the low 40s, my phone lit up. It was Marcus. "Dad, where are you?" His voice was tight and controlled. "Diane said you left the party early. We were worried." "Were you?" I said. "Dad, you have to understand. Tonight was important. I needed the room focused. You had a security guard remove me from the building. You were about to cause a scene. I was about to speak at the anniversary party of the company I built." Silence. Then, "The company I run, Dad. Past tense on your part. We talked about this." "We did not talk about this," I said. "You talked and Diane nodded, and I sat there and believed you both when you said the transfer was temporary, that you just needed to establish yourself, that the title would come back to me in some form when the time was right." "The time is never going to be right," he said, and the flatness of it, the absence of apology or softness, was the thing that finally made it real. "You need to accept that. You are 64 years old. The industry has changed. The relationships you built are 30 years old. Some of those clients are dead, Dad." I looked at the dark of the cottage. I thought about Dorothy. I thought about the first job we ever landed, a strip mall in Brentwood, 1993. She sat in the truck with me while I reviewed the specs, because we could not afford office space, and she was my office. She answered calls on a cell phone the size of a brick, and she made every client feel like they were our most important account, which to us, they were. I thought about what she would have said about this moment. She would have said, "Raymond, stop sitting in the dark." So I stopped sitting in the dark. I called Gerald Haas. Gerald had been my attorney for 22 years, a compact man with a meticulous mind who had drafted every major document in my professional life, including the trust. It was past 10. He answered on the third ring because Gerald was the kind of attorney who answered his phone when established clients called at night. I told him everything. I told him about the party. I told him about the security guard. I told him about the lock and the power. I kept my voice even and factual. I listed events the way I used to brief subcontractors, start to finish. No editorializing, just the sequence and the data. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Ray, do you have the original trust documents?" "In my truck," I said. "I keep a copy in the lockbox in the cab." "Good. Do not go back inside that cottage tonight. Go to your truck. I will meet you at my office at 7 in the morning and we need to look at everything." Before I hung up, I asked him what he was thinking. There was a pause. "I am thinking," Gerald said carefully, "that you are more protected than you know. But I am also thinking you need to see some things I found last week that I did not want to worry you about until I was certain." "What things?" "Get some sleep, Ray. Come to my office at 7. I slept in my truck that night, parked on the street 2 blocks from the property. I have slept in worse places. I used to sleep in the van on long job sites when driving back was not worth the time. The seat reclines. I had a thermos of coffee from the gas station on the corner and a protein bar I found in the glove box. I watched the lights in the main house through the trees. They were on until 2 in the morning. I imagined what they were discussing. I thought I probably knew. I was at Gerald's office at 6:45. He was already there, tie loosened, papers spread across his conference table. "The trust," he said, spreading the documents in front of me, "is the most important thing. You set this up well, Ray. I told you at the time, and I am telling you again now. The operational trust that holds the company transferred control to Marcus as managing trustee. But you retained something very specific. The amendment clause," I said. I remembered it. "You have the right to revoke the transfer of managing trustee If the trustee engages in conduct materially harmful to the trust assets or the original intent of the grantor. Gerald tapped the page. Last quarter, Mercer Electrical's accounts receivable dropped by $400,000. I have been monitoring the financials because you asked me to when you set this up. The company has taken on $2 million in unsecured debt in the past 18 months. There are payments going to a vendor called Keystone Consulting that does not appear to have a website, a phone number, or a physical address. I looked at the numbers. I know how to read a balance sheet. I spent 30 years reading them. The numbers did not look like bad luck. They looked like extraction. It gets worse, Gerald said. He slid a photograph across the table. I looked at it. I did not immediately understand what I was seeing. It was a photograph of Diane, at what looked like a hotel lobby, talking to a man I did not recognize. Then Gerald slid a second photograph. Then a third. In the third one, the man had his hand on the small of her back. He was looking at her with the specific attention of a man who was not meeting her for the first time. His name is Pelton, Gerald said. He is a financial consultant. He has been working with a competitor firm, Cavalier Electrical, in Atlanta. Diane has been meeting with him for 6 months. I had a colleague pull some public records and cross-reference them. I stared at the photographs. I thought about the hand on the elbow, the constant steering, the voice that answered for my son in conversations I was supposed to be part of, the way she had moved him, slowly and steadily, away from me. Not suddenly, never suddenly. Just a half-degree turn at a time until the compass was pointing somewhere I did not recognize. She is trying to position a sale, Gerald said. His voice was very careful. If she can run the company's value down, take on debt, make the books look weak, a competitor can acquire Mercer Electrical at a fraction of what it is worth. Pelton's firm gets a finder's fee. And if Diane has negotiated herself a personal arrangement with that firm on the side, she walks away with something considerably beyond whatever she takes in the divorce. Divorce, I said. I think she has been planning this for 2 years, Ray. I think Marcus is either complicit, which would make him a fool, or he is unaware, which would make him a victim. Either way, the company is being hollowed out, and you are the only one with the legal authority to stop it. I want to hear my options, I said. Gerald sat back. He had prepared this. He had clearly been waiting for the moment when I was ready to hear it. Option 1, he said. We file to revoke the managing trustee designation under the amendment clause. This removes Marcus from operational control immediately and returns the authority to you. We simultaneously notify the company's bank and the primary bonding company of the change in trustee status. All financial transactions are frozen pending review. And option 2. Option 2 is harder to hear, Gerald said. His eyes were steady and without comfort. We do the above, and we also sell. Sell the company. Before the value drops any further, I have been in contact with a buyer, not a competitor, a private equity group out of Charlotte that has been looking for an established electrical contracting operation in the Mid-South for 2 years. They are not interested in stripping it for parts. They want the brand, the client relationships, the crew. They would retain most of the employees. They made an inquiry 6 months ago and I told them we were not interested. They are still interested. How much? Gerald slid a number across the table on a piece of paper. I picked it up. I looked at it for a long time. It was not the number I would have demanded 5 years ago, because 5 years ago the company was at its strongest. But it was not the number a hollowed-out, debt-laden operation would fetch in 2 more years of Diane's steering. It was the number of what remained of something real. Make the call, I said. Gerald reached for his phone. I spent the next 4 hours in that conference room. I signed documents. I answered questions from Gerald's paralegal. I drank 3 cups of coffee and ate a sandwich someone brought from the deli across the street. At 11:15, Gerald's phone buzzed. He looked at it, then looked at me. The bank has been notified, he said. Mercer Electrical's accounts are frozen pending trustee review. Marcus's corporate card is inactive as of 30 minutes ago. And the buyer. Letter of intent signed this morning. They want to do the full review by end of week, closing in 30 days if the books are clean enough to survive due diligence, which they will be once we strip out the Keystone payments and document them as what they are. What are they? Fraud, Gerald said simply. My phone had been buzzing since 9 in the morning. I had turned it face down on the table. Now I picked it up. 11 missed calls from Marcus. 4 from a number I did not recognize. 2 from Diane, which was unusual, because Diane had not called me directly in over a year. There was a voicemail from Marcus from 40 minutes ago. I played it on speaker. His voice was tight and afraid in the way that voices get when the floor has dropped out and the person is still trying to sound in control. Dad, there is something wrong with the accounts. The bank is saying there is a trustee issue and they cannot release funds. Our payroll run is this afternoon. I do not know what is happening, but I need you to call Solomon's office. Actually, no. Call me directly. Call me, please. I set the phone down. I thought about payroll. I thought about Jimmy Tarrant, who had worked for me for 28 years, and the 40 other crew members who had families and mortgages and truck payments. Gerald had already told me the private equity group intended to make payroll whole through the transition. It was written into the letter of intent. The employees were going to be fine. They were always going to be fine. I had made sure of that before I signed anything. My son was the one who was not going to be fine. Gerald drove me to the Mercer building at 2 in the afternoon. I wore the same suit I had worn the night before, the charcoal one with Dorothy's blue thread. I did not have time to change, and I did not feel like it anyway. The lobby was chaotic in the muted, professional way of a company in crisis. People were moving fast. Voices were lowered. The receptionist at the front desk, a young woman named Carla who had been with us for 3 years, looked up when I walked in, and her face did something complicated. "Mr. Mercer," she said. And I knew she meant me, not my son, because she was the right age to have grown up knowing which Mercer had built the place she worked. "Is he in?" I said. "He came in about an hour ago," she said. "He is on the phone. Mr. Mercer, I want you to know. Some of us knew something was wrong for a while now. We did not know who to tell." "You can tell me now," I said. "My door is open." I walked past her desk to the elevator. I had designed the electrical system for this building myself. I knew where every wire ran. I took the elevator to the 4th floor, where the executive offices were. Gerald walked beside me. I heard my son before I saw him. He was in the conference room, pacing, speaking into his cell phone with the frantic energy of someone trying to stop water from rising with their hands. I could hear him through the glass wall. His back was to me. "I do not understand why the freeze would cover the operating account," he was saying. "That is separate from the trust assets. That has to be a mistake. Get the bank manager on the line. Get someone on the line who can actually fix this." Diane was standing at the far end of the conference table. She was very still, in a way that was completely different from my son's movement. She was watching him with the eyes of a person who has already left a room in their mind and is just waiting for their body to catch up. I opened the glass door. Marcus spun around. His face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Relief, then confusion, then anger, then something that looked very close to the expression of a man who has just realized the ground is not there. "Dad," he lowered the phone. "What did you do?" It was not a question. It had no rising inflection. It was an accusation shaped like a sentence. "I did what the trust allows me to do," I said. "I exercised the amendment clause. The managing trustee designation has been revoked. I am the active trustee again as of 9 o'clock this morning." "You cannot do that." He looked at Gerald. "He cannot do that." Gerald set a folder on the conference table. "Page 14, Section 9, Paragraph 3, Gerald said. "Ray included it specifically when we drafted the original trust. It was always there." Marcus stared at the folder and did not open it. I watched him understand, slowly and visibly, what I had understood sitting in my truck the night before. That the documents were real. That I had not made an oversight when I handed him the company. That I had been careful. The way I was always careful. The way you have to be careful when you are building something that other people are going to depend on. "Diane," he said. He turned to her. Tell him what we have been building here. Tell him about the growth plans. Tell him about the solar contracts." Diane looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the thing that Gerald had already told me was there. The calculation. The already decidedness. "I need to step out," she said. She picked up her purse from the chair behind her. "Diane," Marcus said. His voice was different now. Smaller. Don't. I have a meeting, she said. She walked to the door. She paused beside me, not looking at me, and said in a voice that was almost conversational, "You should have done this 2 years ago." Then she was gone. I watched my son watch his wife leave. I watched the understanding move through him the way weather moves, visible from a distance, then all at once surrounding you. He sat down in one of the conference chairs. He looked at the table. "She has been meeting with someone from Cavalier," I said. His head came up. "A man named Pelton. Gerald has the documentation. They have been working on a positioning for a sale, Marcus. Not to a buyer who will keep the company whole. To a competitor who will absorb our client list and shut down our operations." "Why?" he said, and he sounded very young when he said it. "Because she would walk away with something from that arrangement. A finder's arrangement. A personal fee. Whatever they negotiated. And she would have walked away from you at the same time and kept the two things separate enough that you would not have been able to prove the connection." He put his elbows on the table and his head in his hands. "The Keystone Payments," he said into his palms. "She told me it was a consulting firm she had found, that they were helping us with the expansion strategy. I know. I signed off on it. I thought she was helping. I know that too." He looked up. His eyes were red. "Are you going to sell it?" "I already agreed to a letter of intent with a private equity group out of Charlotte." He flinched. "The company is going to a PE firm. They are going to keep the crews," I said. "Jimmy Tarrant keeps his job. Every foreman we have keeps their job. The brand stays. The client relationships stay. What changes is who writes the checks and who runs the strategy. And that needed to change anyway, Marcus. Because the person who was running the strategy for the past 2 years was running it into the ground for her own exit." He was quiet for a long time. Outside the glass wall, I could see people moving through the office with the specific tension of people who know something is happening but do not know what. Jimmy Tarrant was standing near the copy room, not copying anything, just standing there watching the conference room the way old crew foremen watch a job site when they know the load is shifting. I raised my hand to Jimmy through the glass. He raised his back. "Dad," Marcus said. I looked at him. I looked at the face that had my wife's structure underneath it. The jaw, the wide-set eyes. I looked at the man my son had been trying to be and the man he had let someone else make him into, and I thought about the distance between those two things. It was not an uncrossable distance, but it was not a small one either. "You embarrassed me in front of 200 people last night," I said. "You had a security guard remove me from the building I spent 30 years building. You told a room full of clients that what I did was just laying groundwork. I am not going to forget that, Marcus. I am not going to pretend it did not happen." He did not look away. I will give him that. He held my eyes and he did not look away. "I know," he said. "I know I did. I want you to understand something," I said. "Not for my sake, for yours. You have a skill set. You are good with people. You can close a deal in a room. You learned that from watching me, and you built on it, and those are things you did yourself, and they are real. But you let someone convince you that the way to prove those things were yours was to cut me out. That is not how it works. That is not how any of this works." He nodded. "When the sale closes, there will be a portion set aside for you as the former managing trustee. Gerald has the structure of it. It is not what the company would have been worth if it had been run correctly. But it is enough to start something if you decide to start something. Something clean this time." He looked up. "You are not leaving me with nothing." "I built a company out of a used van and borrowed tools," I said. "I am not in the business of leaving people with nothing. That is not who I am. It was never who I was. I need you to remember that, because someone spent a long time telling you a story about me that was not true, and I need you to figure out where the story ends and where I actually begin." I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. Gerald was already gathering his papers. "What do you do now?" Marcus asked. "I am going to go have dinner," I said. "A real one. Then I am going to drive to my property in Montana." He blinked. "Montana. You have property in Montana." "I bought 10 acres outside of Missoula in 2018. I built a small house on it over 2 summers. Your mother knew about it. She was the one who found the land. She always wanted to see that part of the country, and we never had time, and then we ran out of time. So I built the house and I kept it. I kept it because I needed to know that there was a place in the world that was only mine, that I had not given it to anyone, or put it in anyone's name, or folded it into a trust or made it part of a plan for someone else's future. He was very still. I have a truck already packed, I said. Has been for 3 weeks. He looked at me. I am not as surprised as you think I should be by last night, I said. I have been watching the direction things were moving. I just needed to know when I had seen enough. Dad, I am sorry. I looked at him. I looked at his face. I thought about the son he had been before Diane, the one who used to call me on Sundays and ask me questions about conduit bending and three-phase systems, not because he needed to know, but because he knew I liked talking about it. The one who cried at his mother's funeral and grabbed my hand during the service and held it for 20 minutes straight. That son was still in there somewhere. I believed that. I believed it the way you believe in the structural integrity of a building even after you have found damage. Because you built the foundation yourself and you know how deep it goes. I know you are, I said. I walked out of the conference room. I walked through the office. People stepped aside and looked at me, and I looked back at them because they deserved that. They deserved to see that the man whose name was on the original filing was still standing and still paying attention. Jimmy Tarrant fell into step beside me at the elevator. You holding it together? He asked. Barely, I said. He laughed. It was the laugh of a man who has worked hard his whole life and respects the same in other people. You call me when you get where you're going, Mr. Mercer. Let me know it's a decent place. It's a good place, I said. Dorothy found it. He nodded and said nothing else, because there was nothing else to say. I drove north. I drove through Nashville, out past the city limits, up through Kentucky and into Ohio, and somewhere in Ohio the sky opened up, and it rained hard and steady for 3 hours, and I drove through all of it with the windows cracked because I wanted to feel the air. I stopped once for gas and coffee, and a sandwich I ate standing at the hood of my truck, watching the rain work the parking lot into rivers. I thought about Dorothy. I thought about the year we drove across the country for our 20th anniversary, just the two of us. Dorothy reading the map because she did not trust the GPS, and me driving because I always drove, and the radio playing something we both half knew and both half sang, and neither of us caring about any of it. I thought about what she would say about what I had done. I ran through it the way you run through a conversation with someone who cannot have it with you anymore. I gave her the version where I was certain I did the right thing, and the version where I was not sure. I gave her the version where I went back, and the version where I kept driving. And when I got to the end of all the versions, the only one that felt true was the one where she said, Raymond, you already know. I did already know. A man does not build something for 30 years and then watch it be used against him and call that love. A man does not get escorted out of a room by a security guard at his son's instruction and call that family. A man does not freeze in a dark cottage in October and call that home. Love is not a structure that stands no matter what you do to it. Love is a structure that requires maintenance. That requires the basic respect of showing up for it. Not just when it is convenient. Not just when you need something from it. But consistently. Over years. Through weather. My son had let someone else make his choices. He had let someone steer him away from everything real toward everything that looked good in a room. That was a wound he was going to have to find his way through, and I could not carry him through it. That was the hardest thing I had ever had to leave behind. Not the company, not the building with my name removed from it, not the cottage with the new locks or the accounts that were frozen, or the party where a stranger grabbed my arm. The hardest thing was knowing that my son was going to have to learn to stand up on his own, and I was not going to be there to catch him when he stumbled. But I also knew this. I built him out of the same materials I built everything else, and I build things that stand. Somewhere in South Dakota, the rain stopped. The sky opened up clean and dark and full of more stars than you ever see through city light. I pulled off the highway onto a gravel road, and I got out of the truck, and I stood there in the cold air under that sky, and I breathed. I thought about 10 acres outside of Missoula, a small house, the land Dorothy found on a map one Sunday afternoon, pointing at it with her finger and saying, Raymond, look at that view. I had looked. I had seen what she saw. I was going now to finally see it. I got back in the truck. I turned the radio on. I drove west, into the dark, and the stars and the wide open country. And for the first time in a very long time, I drove towards something that was entirely and completely mine. If you have ever sacrificed everything for people who tried to make you believe your sacrifice was nothing, if you have ever looked at your own reflection in a window and remembered who you actually are, hit the like button and follow the channel for more stories like this one.